For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from Cape Town, South Africa. Good morning, Michael.
Morning. Just some slightly cooler US inflation figures yesterday. Of course, the big one is the FOMC meeting, which is taking place today, and we will get an announcement about interest rates in the United States directly following that. But slightly cooler than expected. I'll give you the details in just a second. So basically what that's done is that's kept the markets relatively flat as far as the Asia-Pacific markets are concerned. In China, investors have been waiting for a meeting which we understand has been put off because of COVID-19. It's the annual meeting where the Commerce Department and the Finance Department in China give their ideas about where they think the economy is going. Usually sets economic targets. We haven't heard anything about that. Now, I'm going to stay with China because I did say yesterday that it's gone to the World Trade Organization. Again, amidst these sweeping bans that have come from the United States and export curbs which China is facing as far as semiconductors are concerned. Now, as you probably know, any negotiations with the World Trade Organization take a very long time. But the thing is here that the United States is acting on what it describes as national security grounds, and that tends to push up the matter as far as the waiting list, if you like, of the World Trade Organization is concerned. China will recover, most investors think, from the COVID curbs, but it will be a bumpy ride. And China itself, in sort of anticipation of any more chip war problems, of course, and there will be, is unveiling a $143 billion package to support the semiconductor industry. At the same time, the United States is ratcheting up the chip war by adding, amongst others, Yangtze memory technology, plus others to its blacklist support. And the kind of countries which will benefit from this are going to be India and Vietnam, which are both deciding to be felt to be cost efficient as we speak. So, as far as the United States is concerned, then stock futures relatively flat as a result of those cooler than expected inflation figures. It doesn't sound a great deal of difference, but year on year was 7.1% as opposed to 7.3% as expected. A month on month was 0.1, which was slightly less than expected. These are tiny little things, but they mean an awful lot to the markets, and the markets have taken it being a good move. Now, we're going to hear from the Fed tonight. We're going to hear from the chairman of the Fed, and of course the interest rate decision, which we will get from the FOMC later today. But the balancing act stays exactly the same. What the Fed has to do is not crimp the economy too much, but at the same time, let everybody know that the cost of borrowing will not go down and that inflation will be beaten one way or the other. But the economy, they're hoping, won't be crushed. It'll be what's described as a soft landing. Okay, now, Sam Bankman-Fried, the ex-CEO of the failed FTX, has been denied bail in the Bahamas, as we suspected he would be, and is on his way back to the United States. The security people in the United States are calling it, and this is quite important, they're putting a stress on this, old-fashioned embezzlement, conspiracy to defraud US wire fraud, securities fraud, but remember this old-fashioned embezzlement. They're calling it one of the biggest financial frauds in US history. So the fancy la-di-da about Bitcoin may be existing, but remember that phrase, old-fashioned embezzlement. That's going to be the foundation of the charges that he will be facing in the United States. And the Bahamas would very much like the property that he bought back, just $256 million worth of it. Sometimes we ought to look out for these kind of things. Do you know what? There are bits of caution about this. My old one is, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. Don't be fooled by people with huge educational qualifications in the same way that Bankman-Fried had, and at the same time, be very aware of people offering something that everybody else wants desperately. These are probably very, very generalized cautions. No doubt you will take them on board, but that's what the people who fell for this FTX probably fell for and have lost fortunes as a result of it. Tesla shares down 28% in the recent weeks. That's since Musk took over Twitter, and it's lagging other car makers, actually. Ford, GM, Volkswagen are all slightly up. Here's Tesla down 28%. We know that he used a lot of his shares to purchase Twitter and so on. But investors are looking at Tesla and saying to themselves, we need some shock therapy here. Unsurprisingly, what shock therapy usually means is share buybacks by the company. So you can expect that. Now, to the UK, and riven with strikes, winter of discontent and all that, terrible storms, terrible things. But this is quite important. The chief nursing officer has told the unions, the RCN, the Royal College of Nursing, not to put patients' lives at risk. I suspect that what's happening here is a slight softening in the stance of the strikers, and I think this was slightly reflected yesterday. I mean, the rail strikes are a whole other ballgame, but here you have a chief nursing officer saying to the nurses that want to go on strike, don't put patients' lives at risk as a result of that. We talked briefly yesterday, and we talked last week about the relaxation of city regulation in London. Andrew Bailey is the latest to warn the Chancellor, the Finance Minister, Jeremy Hunt, about city deregulation. If you remember, quite stringent rules were brought in between 2007 and 2008 financial crisis to separate very, very clearly retail banking from riskier investment banking. It's felt that those rules will be relaxed. There are plenty of them, but those are the main rules that will be relaxed. And he is actually saying this ring fence, you want to be careful about relaxing this ring fencing. That's Andrew Bailey speaking from the Bank of England. Oil has got a boost from those cool inflation figures in the United States. Between 70 and 80% is the sort of range. Sounds quite big, actually, if you're an oil trader, but that's what we're looking at the moment. China demand is still absolutely key to all this. Certainly, as far as OPEC's concerned, no guidance from them whatsoever. They've merely been telling us in their yearly report something that we all know. There's a bit of uncertainty about, really? Do we need OPEC to tell us that? I don't think we do. The key to it is China demand. If that starts to build up, then the oil price will start to climb. And finally, just a warning from Hong Kong authorities, if we needed this. Now, remember, Hong Kong being the financial gateway, as it were, to China for lots of businesses. And they are saying, beware of crypto platforms because, and this is their Security and Futures Commission, deposits, in inverted commas, and savers, in inverted commas, are not regulated and get no protection whatsoever. You have been warned. That's Hong Kong, the latest warning on cryptocurrencies. That's the global view.
All right, real quickly. I totally support the Bank of England chief this morning. Isn't Jeremy Hunt overreaching this by pulling all those regulatory frameworks now? Have we forgotten what happened so soon in 2008? Have we forgotten the nationalization of banks like Northern Rock? Have we forgotten what happened to Lloyd's TSB? Is it not time for us to bring sanity back? Those are just my concerns. Because we're beginning to dig the holes again, Michael. I don't know what your take is on this.
Yeah, I do. I share your concerns completely. I mean, even bigger, I think, if I may say so, Rubai, is that I worry, as I said yesterday, there is now a generation of people working in the city with their fingers on those buttons who have no conception of what it was like in 2000 and 2008, let alone the crash and all the rest of it. During that financial crisis, as you quite rightly say, a lot of taxpayers' money was burnt to protect the banks. Some of the banks went bust, some of the American banks went bust as well. And I do feel as though there is a lack of experience operating. I can see that politicians want to open up, as they put it, the bigger transparency, less regulation, Big Bang 2, and all the rest of it in the city. I can't help feeling that those same mistakes are going to be made again because fear and greed never go away, do they?
All right, thanks, Michael. Really worrying the fact that nurses, 100,000 nurses, potentially 100,000 nurses in the UK would be walking out on an industrial strike come Thursday. But what's also concerning is the accusation of the Health Secretary, Bakri, that he's not willing to have conversations around pay with the nurses. I mean, I'd like you to speak to this accusation, this statement, and also the impact, the economic impact, if indeed they do have an industrial strike come Thursday out of the other industries who are planning to go on strike, the impact on the UK economy.
I'm not sure what impact the nurses' strike would have on the UK economy. I know this is supposed to be a business section. I merely raised it because it's all part of the so-called industrial action that the government is having to face right now. I think, and I can't speak for the Health Secretary, all I would say is that the nursing, the RCN, these are the people, the Royal College of Nursing, these are the people calling the strike, have actually said they want to negotiate about money, they want to negotiate about wages, and when they see train drivers who earn a median range of £50,000 a year, and nurses' median range is £32,000 a year, the nurses quite rightly ask themselves, so who's got the harder job? The man sitting in his warm train cab, or us bustling around wards, particularly with the re-advent possibly of COVID-19 and all the normal strains that the National Health Service has to face in the winter. So I feel as though a lot of things are happening, I'm sure, behind the scenes, and a lot of positions are being taken just as they are with most negotiations. I mentioned the fact that the chief nursing officer had written to all of the RCN people to say, look, fine, we understand that you are falling behind as far as your pay is concerned, but when you took this job, it was to protect and nurture patients, and that's what you should be doing at the moment. And that's what she's saying. She's saying, look, people must not die. People must not be put in danger as a result of this strike action. I'm sorry, if you sign up for those kind of jobs, then you have to take that as being part of the job.
Well, the nurses going on strike would definitely put lives at risk. And in any case, the NHS is clearly on the brink. But I wanted to ask you about China. China has now taken its case, the fight over microchips, to the WTO. But there's a clause in WTO rules also that says that, a country can take trade decisions on the grounds of national security. And the Americans are claiming national security. And in any case, a dispute taken to the WTO is not automatic. It will take years. Are there no other options available to China, knowing that the WTO is not likely to influence the United States one way or the other? And then, was it 2 days ago, we talked about the Feds coming out today with a new statement about rates. Well, the CPI that was released yesterday indicated a loosening of inflation in the U.S., now 7.1%, down from 7.7%, lower than the predicted 7.3% by economists. How do you think this is likely to influence, the Fed? Is the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Central Bank, likely to still take a hawkish stance or stay within the range of the 50 basis points that we all had been expecting? Or would J. Powell be hawkish?
I think what I think will interest most everybody about this is not so much the decision, which is pretty well nailed on to be 0.5%. And so these figures apparently show a bit of cooling in inflation. I mean, they're not huge, are they? 7.1 as opposed to 7.3% expected year on year. I mean, I get the fact it's a big economy, and I get the fact that within that there are billions of dollars, but at the same time, all it says to me is the Fed still has work to do. It's got to get inflation down, and it's got to convince investors, and it's got to convince everybody that it is not going to crush the economy as a result of that. That is the job. The job has not changed. I would be more interested, not so much, and the interest rate rise is interesting, much more interesting, I think, are going to be Jay Powell's comments after the FOMC meeting, which will give his view on where he thinks the US economy is actually going. I did mention in my report about the World Trade Organization, interests of national security is the phrase, and that tends to put matters slightly higher up in the in-basket of what the World Trade Organization has to deal with. At the same time, I think it will take quite a few years to do this. At the same time, China is readying a $143 billion package to try to support the semiconductor industry. Make no mistake about it, if it's more cost efficient for semiconductors to be made in India and Vietnam, which I don't know whether it's more cost effective, it's certainly cost effective to be making them in India and Vietnam, then they probably will, whilst the situation in China needs to work itself out. It may well be that there's an enormous amount of protectionism about chips, because chips are the new oil, aren't they? The chips are the new gold. I mean, there's no question about it.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much indeed. Now for business updates across the African continent, Rotus Oddiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning to all our viewers. Talking power, one of my personal favorite topics. President Buhari at the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, restating Nigeria's Vision 2030 energy transition plans, which I believe we're one of the first African countries to lay out this plan last year. So here's the crux of this plan. We're looking at 30 gigawatts of electricity. A gigawatt's 1,000 megawatts, so 30,000 megawatts by 2030. As part of the energy mix, 30% of that has to be renewable energy, wind, solar, and so on and so forth. And the plan is, of course, no petrol or diesel generators by 2060. And then they're looking at, as part of this plan, 5.3 gigawatts of solar energy annually until that time. How are you going to do this? Well, it's going to cost a lot of money. A whole lot of money. If we take a look at the costs, the transition costs, you're looking at $1.9 trillion up to 2060, requiring about $10 billion spent every year. President Buhari did state that, look at that, $3 billion spent across the entire continent of Africa with respect to renewable energy over the last decade. So how you plan to ramp that up between now and it's really tough. Here's a quote from the president, and he said, consequently, the $10 billion per year target of our energy transition plan represents a significant scaling of current investment flows. Think about FDI. And we need, so this is the key part for me. He says we need support from the US to mobilize the needed resources. It is important to note that for African countries, the cost of finance and the perceived investment risk, i.e. enabling business environment that Ayo talked about yesterday, remains significantly higher than for developed economies despite vast improvement. But I want to stick to something here. The part where he says we need the support from the US to mobilize the needed resources. So this is what I was talking about with respect to deals. This thing came out last year. Would have expected that by now he comes back to Nigeria and say, hey, the US is going to fund this to the tune of $3 to $4 billion or so. The electrification project, and look, they have to give the government credit on this. Their rural electrification project, they've been steadily improving renewable energy for rural areas. So about 4 million people have been impacted through solar mini grids, according to the president. Now, here's an interesting quote, something else that I thought was pretty interesting from the president. He said that our aggressive power sector reforms have resulted in cost-reflective tariffs in the power sector for the first time since privatization. Under the Nigeria electrification project, over 4 million people, as I just put that graphic there, have been impacted. I thought it was very interesting that the president is talking about cost-reflective tariffs. Meanwhile, he doesn't want to deregulate the downstream sector and have cost-reflective petroleum products, i.e. the fuel subsidies. I thought that was very interesting. We move on to South Africa, still on the same issue of power. Statistics South Africa, that is the statistics agency, the Department of Statistics for South Africa that gives you inflation, GDP, and so on. They're looking at rejigging how they record power generation in South Africa. They're actually looking at self-generated power. So basically, the grid, if you look at the fall in electricity generation and electricity consumption from about 25% of capacity all the way down to just about 5.56%. Pretty low. So they want to, since the grid is not generating any power, they're looking at, okay, let's add, self-generating power to our stats in order to see what the numbers say. And then Ghana yesterday completed staff level support, staff level approval has been given from the International Monetary Fund for the $3 billion that we've been talking about so long. Here's the Ghana mission chief from the IMF, Mr. Stefan Rudant.
To announce that the IMF has reached a staff level agreement with Ghana on 3-year program that will be supported by an arrangement under the extended credit facility, and in an amount of about $3 billion. Let me add that the agreement is subject to approval by the IMF management as well as the IMF Executive Board in the period ahead, contingent on receiving financing assurances from Ghana's partners and creditors. The Ghanaian authorities have committed to a wide-ranging economic reform program which builds on the government's post-COVID-19 program for economic growth, the PCPEG, and a program that tackles the deep challenges facing the country.
All right, and that's our update for Africa.
All right, thanks, Rotus. We had quite a robust conversation earlier today on the US-Africa Leaders Summit, especially with the president's speech around 30-30-30, and of course, a number of conversations have risen around that. In your report, you talked about the fact that we would have to meet the target, would have to generate about 5 gig of electricity annually.
And that's just solar.
Solar. According to the International Energy Agency, they actually said that Nigeria would only be able to produce 1 gig in 5 years. So already that puts a big question mark. And when we were speaking this morning, we used the term ambitious to describe. It's a great plan, really great. And if we could achieve that, imagine by 2060, no petrol generators in Nigeria. That is heaven. That's what we're looking forward to. Unfortunately, analysts are not optimistic about the president's plans, because what's on ground is not convincing enough to believe that we will be able to achieve. So it's not enough to make statements, give speeches like this, and talk about how we are heading towards achieving that without a clear plan and demonstrable ways that you have put in place to achieve that. There are policies that have been implemented. We know about you talked about the Rural Electrification Agency. Their MD recently talked about the fact that they have had applications towards the mini grids. However, unfortunately, many of them do not meet the criteria. So we need capacity building in that industry. So it's multi-pronged that for this to work, for us to achieve, the 30-30-30 policy, there are a number of policies that must work. And then just going to the IMF and Ghana deal, if I could put it that way, I'd like to know what are the conditions for Ghana, because that's it's not about celebrating $3 billion, but what are the conditions? And many people have talked about IMF conditions being very stringent. What are the conditions?
I know it's going to be.
Let me start with Ghana.
Okay.
Ghana's national currency, the CD, is the worst performing currency in the world. As has been admitted by the finance minister himself, and in a tweet also by the vice president, Bawumia, who was at the signing of this deal with the IMF. And now, apart from that, government debt is
through the roof.
On the very high side, extremely high. The Ghanaian government had to sell government bonds out of desperation. We have seen people going onto the streets in Ghana. The government of Nana Akufo-Addo has clearly disappointed the people in terms of the management of the economy. So now IMF to the rescue, as they had promised, as they had hoped. But of course, it takes months before the deal, could become reality. But that's the situation in which Ghana has found itself. The question is, we have seen many countries going to the IMF, Sri Lanka, now Ghana, other countries. What are the lessons that we can learn? Is Nigeria in a similarly precarious situation, or are we heading in that direction? Are there steps that can be taken to prevent a situation? The only good news coming out of Ghana is that I have not heard that some people have placed adverts to congratulate Nana Akufo-Addo for getting the IMF. As happened in
Malawi.
In Malawi. I hope such a ridiculous thing will not happen in Ghana, because it's an indictment, of Akufo-Addo's own economic management skills. And maybe perhaps, his party will get the result in the next general elections in that country. The second thing, President Buhari, nice speech. He made all the right noises in that statement about just energy transition. But we're looking at 30, right?
Yep.
Yeah, whatever. By that time, many people will not even remember the Buhari government.
Right.
So whatever commitment he has expressed will be determined by the sustainability of those ideas. And that will be in the future. A government that is living is not in a position to make promises.
Yep.
But it's good to go to an international engagement and make all these promises. More so, as the Americans have pledged $290 million for the Power Africa project. And then there were some other things that came out of that meeting yesterday. You know, Starlink, some special digital achievement inside Nigeria.
And then the deal with Rwanda.
Where is that? You know, because Minister of Communications was talking about that. And then this cost reflective tariffs. The managers of the discos, they are even saying that the tariffs are not cost reflective enough. So, but it's good to say the right things before an international audience.
So, you see, when I talk again, people will say I'm talking.
And then you start trending.
I like facts.
You're still trending.
This thing is not a big deal.
Yeah.
This approach to it will not work. It's not government that will bring about this growth of 30 gigawatts. It can't do it. That money, it will be a tall order. You need to be able to liberalize the sector in such a way that investors can come in and invest in the sector with cost-reflective tariff. And that's why I was shocked when it said cost-reflective tariff, where? And help us grow the system. Because nobody's going to give you this point something trillion. And also, hope you know that there's something called variation of contracts.
Yep.
The cost will increase. This 1.7 cannot be the cost in the next 30 years. It's 2060. And it's even fall flat on its feet. This, what is it called, idea is not even ambitious enough. There's no well thought through plan as regards to, let me move to you. In 2009, Bangladesh had 5 gigawatts. Today, Bangladesh is doing 25 gigawatts. 2009 to this time. How long did it take Bangladesh? Calculate 2009 to this time. Just a little over
a decade.
A little over a decade.
Yeah.
So why are we waiting till 2060 to get 30 gigawatts when Bangladesh moved from 5 gigawatts in 2009 to 25 gigawatt now? And they are still ramping up. The only reason why Bangladesh has slowed down, and you can go and check this data out there, it's empirical. Why Bangladesh has slowed down is because, you know, the cost of diesel and other power plants have increased because of the Russia-Ukrainian war. And they are slowing down because they want to keep their reserves, so they are not spending money on these energy inputs. But if Bangladesh can do it in that time, why can't we do it even more than that? So let's go and check what they did there to be able to ramp up. You see, these things are not rocket science.
Still the Siemens deal. Don't forget the Siemens
They are not rocket science. So we just like to deceive ourselves. Now we have been given another ambitious goal that we'll be dealing with at 2060 will not get power. These things are not a big deal. Rotus, it is sad that we're still talking about this now. We built Ijora Power Station in the 20s. As at that time, unit charge of electricity was 8 pence. So Ijora Power Station built over 100 years ago. We've not been able to ramp up let's go. But I don't want to talk. If I talk again, they will say I've started
Start
again.
trending.
Let's go. Let's move on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.